Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And today we have a very special guest, Greg Young. I've gotten to meet Greg over the last few months. We just recently participated in a training that Greg came to Rockford and trained some of our staff at KP counseling regarding critical incident debriefing and training, specifically with first responders. But Greg, there's a whole lot more to what you have going on in your world besides just with the workshops and trainings that you do. So welcome to the journey, and why don't we first start with a question that I always ask our guests: What when you're not working and you're not getting pulled into a scenario to help out, what does Greg do for fun? What do you do to recharge?
Well, Kevin, first and foremost, thanks for having me, buddy. It's good to see you again. Um, what what I do for fun in to kind of balance that stress scale, as I always refer to it, is if it's a winter and we have a lot of snow, I snowshoe
Hmm.
because I like to get out in the woods, out in the trail, where it's just peaceful and quiet and it's beautiful. But normally I ruck. I used to be a runner years ago, but my knees and arthritis have kind of taken up residence in my body, and so I find other ways to adapt and overcome. And so rucking is one of them. Fast walking, some of those kinds of things, or kayaking when we go up north.
Gotcha. And so, for some of our listeners that may not be familiar with rucking, maybe if you could kind of give
Yeah.
a very beginner version of what is rucking, and what have you noticed going from being a runner to going to moving into rucking as a form of exercise? To maybe kind of first tell us what it is, and then tell us what that experience has been like.
Yeah, rucking is actually something that's really it's kind of a growing kind of sport for just the general public. It originally its roots come from the military, the rucksack, that they
Mhm.
would carry, and particularly you get into special forces like Navy SEALs and others would use a weight pack, and they would walk with a lot more weight than I could carry. But and it was kind of a fitness test, kind of a litmus test, and they would just walk as far as they can. So usually for ruckers like me, if you can do 10 to 15% of your body weight, you can get ruck plates, you can get special packs. I just use a 511 tactical pack that I got at a conference, a chief police conference I spoke at. And it was just sitting around, and I thought, well, heck, I'm going to take this up. Tried it. You can't do it every day because it's kind of hard on the body, but you burn a lot of calories, a lot more than you would just walking if you walk at a brisk pace. So I like rucking. It's lower impact on my
Mhm.
joints.
Mhm.
Um, than running would be. So
Gotcha.
I love it, and I don't know if I'll snowshoe or ruck today because it actually snowed this morning.
Oh, gotcha. And so and maybe tell us a little bit where are you at? I know where the picture that you have behind you is not necessarily where you reside primarily. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your at least two of your locations?
Well, where the picture you see behind me there is where I'd like to be.
Okay.
That's where our family cabin is in the Upper Peninsula, where it's on the tip of a point of a little 250-acre lake. There's just a handful of cabins there, and that's really kind of a spiritual place for me, where I get grounded. But actually, I live in Germantown, Wisconsin, which is northeast suburban corner of Milwaukee, a nice suburban area.
Nice. Okay. Nice. And have you been in Wisconsin your whole life?
No, I actually
No.
grew up in Indiana,
Oh.
so adjacent to Illinois.
Okay.
I grew up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, um, and played football when I was in sports there. Crawfordsville is about 30 miles due east of Danville, Illinois. So
Oh, okay.
it's kind of that, but then went to Purdue University for college for my undergrad.
Okay. I have relatives that live a little bit east of Evansville, Indiana, in a small
Oh
town
yeah.
called Boonville, Indiana. And so
Oh, that's beautiful country.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I've been down well ever since I've been a little kid, and then my wife had her parents are from Boonville. So my uncle moved down there to be a dairy manager, a dairy farm manager. And then I used to go down as a kid and help out on the farm in the summer times and
Uh-huh.
stuff. And then uh, later, when Diane and I got together, Diane's family's originally from Boonville, so we go down there at least once a year. So yeah, beautiful area.
Yeah, Covered Bridge Festival in the fall. I think it's probably a part of that whole thing in the fall, those
Yeah.
festivities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. So maybe tell us a little bit. So athletics were in sports were part of your background,
Yep.
and then you went to Purdue. What did you study in Purdue, and did you play athletics then, or well, yeah, kind of tell us where your trail went from high school.
Well, in high school, my senior year, I played. I started with a football team on offense, and we were undefeated. And they retired our jerseys, but I had a scholarship offer to play at Evansville,
Okay.
and I decided it was a pretty modest, scholarship offer, but I decided I'm going to go to a larger university. So I went to Purdue, and I started out, Kevin, in pre-med.
Okay.
Pre-med. But then it was kind of a long, convoluted, I call it a sacred journey that we all take. Ended up in sociology, cultural anthropology, and with the cultural anthropology, a specialization in Native American studies.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. I don't know
Interesting.
if we had that conversation, but yeah,
No, we didn't, but that's definitely a background interest of myself as well. So,
I know.
so yeah. So continue. So would you? So is that what you majored in?
Actually, sociology, yeah.
Yep.
Sociology was my
Okay.
major, and cultural anthropology was my minor. And I had a couple of profs in my near the end of my education at Purdue in the sociology department that were really encouraging me to go on and get my PhD and teach at the college or university level, because teaching is really, I think, is kind of in my blood, as you know.
Sure. Yeah.
And but I met my wife Grace the last year, my senior year. But I had this tug, Kevin, this old spiritual tug from going way back. I call it the angels that I wrestled with. Okay. Then no, I don't want to be a pastor. I'd gone to South America as a part of a work camp experience in high school, and so I was very active that way. It was in a Methodist church, United Methodist Church. Um, but then I met Grace in ethnographic theory. It was a dual level graduate and undergraduate level course at Purdue in cultural anthropology, and we started end up dating, and 8 months later we got married. So her dad was a clinical psychologist and a professor of philosophy, and also a United Church of Christ pastor. And so I met him. I decided, what do you think if I decided I want to go to seminary? So I decided to go to seminary. I was afraid that pastors are always walking around back in those days, kind of that whole transference thing. It's like they're all walking around wearing black robes and frowning at everybody all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was, based on some previous experience, but her dad was a totally different kind of role model from that
Mm-hmm.
way. And it's ironic as I look back in my life now, I'm doing very similar things to what he did. A lot of it parallels what he did. Yep.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm interested in that piece that somewhere, it sounds like somewhere in your maybe middle school, high school years, you felt a tug or a pull, and as
Yeah.
you said, you were wrestling with that prompting, and maybe even buried it or distracted yourself from that prompting, and then Grace comes into your life, and obviously you meet her dad and stuff. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that experience, because I know a lot of people listening will hear that calling, and
Yeah.
either one, refuse the call because no, I don't want to go down that, or whatever it is, and then inevitably recognize that no matter what they do, it didn't go away. So and then they later accept the call. But yeah, tell us, a little bit about that wrestling. I'm curious about that.
Well, I tried a number of different things, obviously to distract it,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, Kevin. And but I even in college when I was at Purdue, I was very active with the Wesley Foundation, because Purdue is like UW, a large university, or University of Illinois in Champaign, and so I was very active. but I did not want to go into what we call parish ministry. You know, if I did a ministry, I wanted to do something in the trenches,
Mhm.
which is kind of ironic because that's kind of what I do now.
Mhm.
But we had to have parish experience, you know. So I wrestle with that. So there was actually a group when I was at Purdue one spring break. We went to Jamaica as a part of a work team to help build an office building or get it started for the foundation and whatever the length of the time the spring break was. But we met up with a group from Indiana State University in Terre Haute, and the campus minister's name was Dr. He was Reverend Sin, Sinn, Sin. And so when they showed up at Purdue and we all kind of flew down together, they all had "Sin is in" T-shirts. Now that's a whole other conversation, but it was a great experience. So those seeds were already there. That tug was always there. And I mean, I could tell you a lot of stories about like when we were in Ukraine, going to Ukraine, there was a pastor who said, I feel on this tug to go with you guys. So, but that's another conversation,
Mhm.
maybe
Mhm.
another podcast at some point.
Sure.
But that tug was still there. And, you know, and I think um, as much as I tried to bury it, or as much as I wrestled with it, it came back and
Mhm.
it was validated in meeting Grace's dad.
Mhm. Yeah. You know, I was just having this conversation with some of my staff the other day, actually in my Milwaukee offices, and we were talking about it was an exercise that we did during our supervision, and we were talking about what drew us into the field, and I mean the counseling field, and as I shared about my experience, there was numerous times where I would say, nope, I don't want to work with children. I don't want to work with youth. And then there was the door that I was to walk through. And so I did. And I don't want to work in the school. And there was these numerous things that I would say on a Monday that I wasn't going to do. And then within a couple of days, that was the door that was that I was to walk through. And even if I resisted it for a time period, the door still didn't go away. And eventually I would walk through the door, and then a whole nother world would open up, and um, but it was similar to like what you said, that my first response to it was I didn't want to, or I even was as bold or arrogant or whatever you want to say no, I'm not going to. And then it was kind of like God was like going, "Hey, well, thanks for your opinion, but this is the door that's
Yeah.
still there."
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about, a little bit on your journey. Obviously, kind of the highlights of that. And I know the work that you're doing now, wasn't really what you intentionally were thinking about back in Purdue. So kind of bring us up to speed now and what you do now.
Okay, very good. Well, I mean, it's kind of a convoluted journey. As I told you, in Purdue, I left school theology at Denver University, at least initially. And then I went from there, I went to United Theological Seminary when we really felt more grounded in the Midwest, closer to home. So went there, lived in the Twin Cities for 6 years, actually, fell in love with it. And what I found was, talk about the whole counseling piece, because there's a part of that with me as well. Um, but during that time, they said you have to have, in order to receive ordination in my denomination, or judicatory, they call them, I had to have some parish experience. So after seminary, and we had to do theological statements after 3 years of seminary education, like kind of graduate program. And I was sent to International Falls. Well, actually, after International Falls, excuse me, I was in the Twin Cities as a youth pastor in a large congregational church on Lake Minnetonka. It'd be a great place to be. You couldn't afford to live there, that kind of salary, because all the execs in General Mills lived on the lake and everything else. So we were 6 months in International Falls. Really had a baptism by fire with all kinds of horrific things I had to respond to. And you're kind of out there on an island, and International Falls is 100 miles from Virginia, which is the nearest detox place a person can get detox. So I was dealing with a lot of alcoholics that be called into a park, because I became kind of a pastor to the whole community. And from there, though, I accepted a call to Northport, Michigan, which is across from Door County. It's it's a beautiful resort country. Sugarloaf Ski Mountains nearby on that peninsula that juts out. Was there for 4.5 years. But then I felt, there's more. I still had this piece of wanting to do a ministry outside of the parish. Okay. So I accepted a call to a church in Germantown over here, St. John. I was there for 15.5 years. But during that time, Kevin, I was very active in like local committees and chaired this, chaired that, like Greater Germantown Committee, things like that. But I had a lot of people in the community coming up to me for counseling, okay, pastoral counseling, and you don't get much other than learning how to do maybe active listening and those kinds of things in seminary. And so I applied to a program called it's the Center for Religion and Psychotherapy of Chicago. It's down in a loop. It's right on Michigan Avenue, tied in with the Hyde Park Consortium and the University of Chicago. And I had to do a year of my own therapy to be accepted in the program. One of the best things I ever did, by the way. It's become more self-aware, what my triggers are, that whole inner journey. And so I did that and worked part-time at the pastoral counseling centers of Greater Milwaukee. During that time, though, my church then said, I had 2 little children, my wife and I did, that we're not going to support you anymore if you continue to finish your doctorate, and so it was either that or, because it wasn't income producing at that point. So I basically did the clinical piece, didn't finish the didactic piece, which was really minimal at that point because I was there for 2 years. And I said, what am I going to do with this? Lord, what am I going to do with this? Like Topol, who just passed away from Fiddler on the Roof. Oh, Lord, that kind of thing. And I did work pastoral counseling center Greater Milwaukee for a while. But I found it's really convoluted, Kevin. I then I heard the thing called critical incident stress management, went to a training, Salvation Army was offering it. And they said, I want to make a deal with you. If we want you to respond to a crisis, if we did this, we're going to train you to be a trainer. In critical incident stress management, we're going to pay the way. And how could you turn down an offer like that? And so one thing led to another. And then I started doing my own work on top of that, and then started getting called to respond to, obviously Hooke and Katrina was one of the first, part of the strike team, trying to determine needs up and down the coast right after Labor Day, and found that in emergency mental health situations, that was my niche. That was my niche, and I still do parish ministry part-time, but they fully embrace what I do. The rest of it's just, from there, it was like Sandy Hook. I got called out as a response to that. The Sikh Temple mass shooting, the Azana Spa shooting, Molson Coors, a lot of mass shooting kinds of things. And I started working a lot with first responders in that process, because they really want to have a person who's had that boots on the ground kind of experience. And then most recently, as you alluded to, Ukraine, 2 trips to Ukraine.
Oh, so just in the past year, you've gone to Ukraine twice.
Well, actually 19. No.
19, okay.
19 was my first time. And that was our first time there.
Okay.
I think we're connected on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
When I was contacted on LinkedIn by a guy named Yaroslav Malko, he was in Ukraine at the time. They were actually converting a lot of war chaplains from the military because the war in 2014-15 with Russia had subsided. They thought, we aren't going to need military chaplains anymore. So they're going to convert them to become police chaplains. They wanted to develop police programs like the U.S., as opposed to what it was, their whole Russia thing with, they're more an extension of that, that whole political structure, and wanted community policing, those kinds of things. So we were over there. I met with the Minister of Internal Affairs with the 2 other officers, since I was a leader of the group. And then he gave us a special police escort. We were if you've been following the war, and I know you have, we were actually in Mariupol. We were
Mm,
in Kharkiv. We were in Lysychansk. We were in the Donetsk area, all those areas that we could not go to now. But we were meeting with police. We were going to churches to help recruit chaplains. And
mm,
then I did a lot of virtual training in the years since. There were 90,000 Russian troops permanently stationed on the border when we were there in 2019. So they kind of thought this was imminent. 1.5 million of them had already fled to go to Kyiv, more centrally located, or further west. And then, of course, my most recent trip was this past August, where I was actually, we were invited in to help them with moral trauma, worked with war crimes investigators. And we got within about 90 to 100 miles of the Russian border. We were in harm's way, to be sure. We were in Dnipro and then the Polvata area. So, and I may go back this year if the situation is calm enough, for us to come over and help them.
sure. So I want to go and explore something you just mentioned, and definitely was something that when we were doing our training 6 weeks ago or so, that you had introduced the concept of moral trauma,
Yes.
and so let's talk a little bit about that, and what do you mean by moral trauma, and what let's talk a little bit about that.
Oh man, how much time do we have?
Yeah.
Moral trauma. Yeah, moral trauma. Actually, I first became introduced at Syracuse University, would be a good source, for your listeners to follow. They were doing, obviously, and I think it's the way I introduced it. They were doing actually a lot of a lot of PTSD. I refer to as PTSI, the injury portion, to try to destigmatize it for our first responder audience, to get help. It's okay to get help. And they were a lot of vets coming over with PTSD/I, and they found that they could treat them with all the modalities of treatment, that you're very familiar with and utilize, for people with PTSD/I. But they would go home and existentially they would find that there's still something wrong. For instance, if they had to say shoot a kid who had a bomb vest on, came into a military camp, and they had no choice but to use lethal force, because the kid was going to kill and blow up the camp, when all their options were eliminated. It's a horrible feeling. I've just killed a kid. And they'd look in the mirror and they think, I'm an evil person. I'm a horrible human being. I don't deserve to live. But there's another side, another face to moral trauma. It has many faces. The face that I was dealing with in Ukraine was these war crimes investigators were uncovering these mass graves. They were hearing the stories and looking at the pictures, or seeing eyewitnesses and talking to people vicariously traumatized, in Bucha and some of those areas where women and children were indiscriminately shot on the street. Citizens were shot. And how could another human being do this to other human beings? Even vicariously, we can be morally traumatized just by that, because our unconscious does not recognize whether that actual experience, at least in the book I'm reading right now, talking about it's called The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, gets into that, whether it's realized or whether it's imagined, it still has an impact on us. So it's very interesting. So we did a lot of work with them, and they would like me to come back. Another way of looking at it too is from a spiritual perspective, is a soul wound. It's a wound deep, very deep in our soul. Those things that, how could other human beings do that? We turn on the news or listen, or that we experience, or that unfortunately those wounds that we carry, where we've been wounded. So that's moral trauma.
So let me what came to mind, and we may have talked about this before, but tell me if this is in the same kind of direction. I was running a group at one point, or still running a group right now, and it's a homicide support group. And I've been doing it for almost 15 years now. And these are all individuals, families, and family members who have lost a loved one. It could be friends too, but primarily it's family members who've lost a loved one to homicide. And And unfortunately, there's a high rate of homicide in the Rockford area. And one particular time, there was a family that was there, and just the short version of it, uh, the one of the parents was extremely upset after coming for many uh, meetings, finally spoke up, and he talked about that this was not supposed to happen to his offspring. This was not to happen because they had followed all the rules. They had gone to church, they had gone to Sunday school, they had done everything that they were supposed to do, and this was not supposed to happen. Now, I think everyone there recognized that they weren't suggesting that someone else in the room did deserve it to happen. But I think it was this dilemma that they believed that they had done everything they could to safeguard their family and offspring, and still this horrible incident had happened anyways. But it was all tied to a religious uh, belief that if we do blank, blank, and blank, then the outcome will be this.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
fall into the same kind of broad category as moral trauma, or is that something a little bit different?
Yeah, I think it would. I think it would. The thing of it is, I listen to you. I mean, if you live life long enough doing what you do and what I do, you'll hear that. And people were saying that coming out of the pit at 9/11 and into that big tent they called the Taj Mahal outside, when they were trying to do recovery work, essentially. Why? It's the why question. I mean, and that really taps into my theological belief, I think, Kevin, a little bit, if you want to get into that. I believe we do have free will. That we wouldn't learn and grow if we did not have that. If we were just puppets, marionettes, on a string, that means that bad things can happen. That doesn't mean that God doesn't love us, that God doesn't care for us. But you know, it's like the rabbi Kushner's book, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?
Mhm.
I mean, he kind of wrestled with that too. It's like, but they do happen. I mean, that's just what life is. And it isn't so much that they happen as what we do with them, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, we've all had bad things happen and we say, why? Or we become bitter. And that's okay. We have to hold that feeling. And, when I would hear something like that, I don't know if I think I would probably be almost like phony or cardboard to them if I felt I needed to explain it away.
Mhm.
And saying, I really don't have a good answer for that, except to say that, there is bad, evil in the world, and this gets in that whole light and darkness thing too, in a way for me. It's like the book I'm working on right now, hate can throw everything it has at us. But if you look through a different set of lenses, I mean, we have to deal with grief. We have to deal with that. We Love always has a final word. Love always resurrect. It's kind of like Ezekiel on that battlefield. I use that example, where he's taken out to this battlefield and, this vision, this ancient battlefield and all of this loss. It's a scene of desperation and despair, utter total loss for as far as the eye can see. And he asked the question, shall these bones live? And of course, the Lord says, essentially, these bones will rise again. And hence the African American spiritual, them bones are going to rise again. And it's so true. And so I use example after example of horrific things, including Ukraine, that I'm working on that chapter right now. That that it does. Love always responds, whether it's a Pulse nightclub, whether it's whatever it is. I'm not trying to sweep under the rug the pain, that journey, that work we have to do. But if we look also through another set of lenses, we'll see that love always has the final word. I saw it with 9/11.
Mhm. Yeah. And and we've talked about this numerous times on here of Viktor Frankl's work,
Yeah.
Admiral Stockdale's work in the Vietnam prisoner of war camp. This idea that having a belief, having a faith that there is a bigger point to all of this, and this is something for me to grow and learn through, but that doesn't take away the horrific aspect of what I'm currently in, right?
Well,
And
yeah. Well, post-traumatic growth, the book I'm reading right now says that post-traumatic growth does not spring out of resilience, which is kind of interesting. It 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 comes out of embracing the trauma and working through that, um, and getting to a point of, as we talked about, when I was there for the training, to a point actually where we're actually stronger in a lot of ways. What do we learn by dealing from that? What do we, and how can we turn the tragic things that happen in our lives, those scars, into stars or whatever? But how do we turn them into something that would be meaningful to help other people?
Mhm.
I think that's a process, a part of the healing, at least as I see it from
Yeah.
a spiritual perspective.
Well, and when I do some training, resilience trainings for schools, I challenge them that resilience isn't about getting over something, or having someone rescue you so you can just get back on your feet again. It's about going through something so that you can do what you just said, is that you can actually learn from it. And that is, I know for me, extremely challenging, because the temptation is I just want it to go away. I just want to get back to normal. I just want it, the whatever to succumb. And that could be if I'm working out, or if that could be going through some type of, some type of experience. And when I can ground myself and say that, yes, I do believe there will be something that I can learn and grow and develop from this, so that I can then share with others. If I can remind myself that I don't have to make the story worse than it already is.
Right.
I don't go ahead.
Well, the thing I was going to simply say is that we could talk about this forever, couldn't we?
Yep,
But
yep.
it's yeah. But when I train, I'm always sharing my stories, as I know you are.
Mhm,
I'm sharing my stories, some of which have happened to me, and others of which I've been called into, that I've experienced in a different way. And I want to honor victims by what I learn, what I integrate, that I can then transform to help others, in a way that's healing me, in a way that's helping, hopefully, that I'm offering training to as well.
Well, and just speaking of and the individuals at KP, the therapists at KP that we worked with a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago, they all said hi, and
Oh,
now and so three of them have, but now we've been called into incidences that have happened in the Rockford area, as well as Mark had to assist someone while he was on vacation down in Florida, and so
oh, he didn't tell
so
me that. Yeah.
yeah, that just happened yesterday. So
Okay.
yeah, so but but to your point, that uh the training that you provided for us gave Pat and gave Mark, gave Ashley a format in which they then, when they got called to work with the fire department, when they got called to work with another incident, that they were able to not just have that, they would have that format, but then they could then just be present, which is something that they've been doing in therapy for a long time. Now it's just a different structure, a different format, as we're doing the debrief or the processing.
Matter of fact, Pat actually contacted me a couple of days ago,
Okay.
talking about that, and saying and thanking me. That's why we do what we do, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
that's what keeps us going. If it's helpful, and if we provide something that's still relevant, as long as God can use me, I'm going
Yeah,
to do it.
absolutely. Greg, I know that we could go on and talk for an extended period of time, and if it is all right, I would like to go ahead and plan on scheduling another time for us to get together to go maybe even a little bit more into what critical incident stress management is, and
Mhm.
and then we can go a little bit deeper into that the next time. But right for the time being, though, if someone wanted to reach out to you or was interested more in your work, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Well, probably at either my email or my phone. And the email is criticalincidentresponse@gmail.com. Kind of tells what I do, doesn't it? Criticalincidentresponse@gmail.com. Or if they wanted to call me, although they want to leave a message, It's 414-573-6008.
Perfect. Well, Greg, as always, I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you, and I definitely appreciate the work that you do, and I appreciate that you have continually listened to that call and that nudging. And if you're like me, which I think we're more similar than different, we may first resist it because we have other plans, but we've learned that sooner or later, and usually hopefully it'll be sooner, that we can get on to the work that's at hand. So
It's been, thank you. I'm honored to be with you, Kevin. You're right. We could talk more. Look forward
yeah.
to it.
All right. Thank you again. For anyone who's listening, this idea that Greg and I were talking about regarding our own journey and being open to that prompting or that nudging and that door that may appear, and to have the courage to go through that, even if or even when the situation may seem to be a loss or something traumatic, there still is an opportunity for there to be a teacher there for us to grow and then give back to others. As always, thank you for being with us, and look forward to being with you next week.